In today's video, I'm going to teach you guys how to make an underbust corset. So this top part here is going to have the regular princess that bustier. It's not going to have that whole division here that comes with a regular corset. This is going to have a regular princess that bustier here, and then the boning and all of that is going to be under the bust. That's why it's called an underbust corset. So if you want to see how we draft, cut and sew this, definitely keep on watching.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there.
So we've already gone ahead to gum our lining with a soft gum, and I did that for two pieces, for the two pieces I have, front and the back. And to do that, I divided my bust measurement by 4, placed it on the lining, and I had 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 inches extra. So once you get your bust measurement, you place it on your lining, make sure that you have at least 8 inches extra for the front, and then for the back, same thing but with a zipper allowance. So that's how I got the width of the fabric. Now I drew a baseline, and then from that baseline I marked my bust point 10 inches, under bust 13 inches, and I also went ahead to mark the length I want, and I want my length to be 23 inches. So this is going to have a basque waistline, so that's why it has a very long length. Now I'm going ahead to just extend all those lines I marked. Now I marked my shoulder measurement divided by 2, and I added 2 inches allowance to that. Now I also marked my bust span measurement plus half an inch. Okay, my bust span measurement divided by 2 plus half an inch. So the bust span is the distance from the nipple to the nipple, and the distance from the nipple to nipple is 8 inches. So 8 inches divided by 2 is 4 inches, and then I added half inch allowance. So that's how I got that line I marked. Now I'm just connecting those shoulder allowances to the bust point line. Now I marked 2 inches from that bust span line, and then I just extended those lines as well. And then I went ahead to draw a curve to connect those 2 points. I have a detailed tutorial on how I draft a princess that bustier and how I cut it. So if this is confusing, you can definitely check out those videos. I have a whole playlist that you can check out to understand this process better, okay? Now I'm just replicating the lines I marked on the front. I'm replicating them on the back as well. And now I'm just going ahead to just cut along those lines. Now this is my center front, and then I'm going ahead to now cut the side front. And then I'm also cutting along that line so that it's nice and straight. And I'm just taking my front piece. This is how I'm going to sew it, basically right sides facing. Then I'm just setting that aside. Now for the back piece, I'm just extending the lines I had drawn earlier. And then I'm also connecting, or I'm also extending the lines I marked earlier as well. Now placing the center front on top of the back piece, I'm just going ahead to just mark the point where my zipper allowance is. And then I'm extending that zipper allowance line. Now those are the 2 allowances I have for my shoulder. I'm just connecting that to the bust point line, just like I did earlier. For the back as well, from that bust span line, I'm also marking 2 inches, but this time the 2 inches goes all the way to the bust point. For the front, the 2 inches stopped at the under bust line, but for the back piece, the 2 inches that I marked goes all the way to the bust point line. And now I connected that point with the second shoulder allowance, and I just cut along those lines. Again, if this is confusing, I have a whole playlist, Princess that bustier, detailed how to draft it. Okay, so for this, we're just going to focus on how we can convert this princess that bustier drafted into an underbust corset. Okay, now I've gone ahead to sew the back pieces and the front pieces as well, and I've placed the front piece on top of the back piece. Now I'm just placing it, taking a random piece of cloth and just placing it under the bust. Now I divided my bust measurement by 4, placed that above that bust curve, marked that point, and added 2 inches allowance. I'm doing the same thing for the shape measurement. I divided it by 4, placed it under the bust, and added 2 inches allowance. Now for the waist, I'm also dividing my waist measurement by 4, placing it towards the bottom of the piece, and then I also added 2 inches allowance. Now I made sure that my tape was at the underbust point, which is 13, and then I also went ahead to mark my armhole line, which is 8 inches. Now for my shoulder, I marked my shoulder divided by 2 and I added 1 inch allowance. My shoulder measurement is 14 inches divided by 2, that's 7 inches, so that's what I marked with 1 inch allowance. Placing the tape again, making sure that the underbust point is where it's supposed to be. I'm also going ahead to mark the depth of my neck, which is 6 inches. Now I'm just going to go ahead and just draw a curve. I want to make this a sweetheart neck, so that's why I'm just curving it in like that. So I just connected it to that armhole curve. This is also going to have a yoke, so I'm going to show you guys how to draft the yoke as well. So now for the yoke, I want the neck to be as high as 3 inches. I want a very, very high neck, and I want the width to also be 3 inches when folded. So this is folded, so that's 3 inches. But then when you open it up, because it's folded, bear in mind that it's going to be 6 inches wide. That's the neck. So folded is 3 inches for the width and 3 inches for the depth. And I'm just going ahead to just cut along those lines, and I've cut my front neck as well. I'm just also going to go ahead to cut my back neck. So the back neck is 2 inches deep, so it's not as low as the front neck, but the width of the front and the back is the same. Now I'm just trimming the center back open, which is where my zipper is going to be, and I also went ahead to just trim out that sweetheart neckline. So as you can see, that's my neck, that's my yoke for the front piece cut out. I'm also going to mark or draft the yoke for my back piece as well. Now from the underbust point, I'm just going to mark 3 inches, right? 3 inches from the underbust point, both for the back piece alone and then also for the front. Now from that 3 inch mark, I'm just going to go ahead and just create that diagonal line to the center front, which is going to give that basque waist effect. Since this is also an underbust corset, I'm also going to just mark a line directly under the bust that I'm going to cut out and put a different piece of fabric that's going to have the boning. So I'm going to have to just cut that out. Now for the back piece, it's going to be a regular half length, which is 3 inches on after the underbust. So that's what we have for that one. Now this is what it looks like. Since this is a stretchy velvet, I'm going to use a hairstay or a cloth gum to gum on it. But before we do that, I'm just going to go ahead and just loosen the seams of the front pieces and the back pieces as well. And this is what they look like once I've loosened them out. I'm going to use this now to cut on my fabric. Now this is my fabric. Now when you're cutting your fabric, you have to pay attention to the pattern of the fabric, especially for the center front. So if there's any maybe design that you want centered on the center front, you have to make sure that you pay attention to that and you place it correctly when you're cutting, so that you don't have like a flower or a rose that's supposed to be centered in a different place. I hope that makes sense. So it's important that, as you can see, I wanted to center this curved spiral stuff on the fabric, so that's what I did. But for the rest of the pieces, I just cut them as usual. I left about 1/2 inch seam allowance around, just so that when I gum with the fabric with the soft gum, I don't and it shrinks maybe, I don't lose some inches. Now this is the lace I'm going to use to cut my yoke. So I place the yoke, the lining that I used to draft the yoke, I placed it on top of the lace, and then I'm just cutting all the way around. I also left about half of an inch seam allowance around. Apart from the neck, I left half of an inch seam allowance. And this is what we have basically. This is the front piece, and for the back piece I also cut it out as well. Now this is the velvet I cut out for the underbust corset. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using a cloth gum or a hairstay to you know, gum on this velvet. Now I have a question for you guys. How do you spell hairstay? I learned that it's called hairstay, but I don't know how to spell hairstay. Is it hair, like hair that was on our head, and then stay? Let me know in the comment section if you know the correct spelling of hairstay. Okay, so after gumming it, I just went ahead to mark the lines that I want to sew my bonings on. So I'm leaving about 2 inches between the lines. Initially I left about 1.5, but I realized that my boning would not be enough to create so many lines, so I decided to just stick with 2 inches, and that left me with about 6 lines where I'm going to be sewing my bonings on. So for the fabric, I also went ahead to gum it with a soft gum, and then I'm just trimming all that excess, and I went ahead to go and iron it again, so to make sure that everything is nice and neat. I did the same thing for my back pieces. I used the soft gum to gum on all of them. Now for my breast pad, I gummed the center front and the 2 side front pieces with the breast pad, as you can see. If you want to know how I cut the breast pad, what measurements I used, and how I gummed it on my fabric, I have a video for that, and the link will be in the description box down below. Now taking my lining again, remember that I had used the half of the line, the bottom half of the lining, I had used it to cut the underbust corset. Now I've loosened each of those pieces, and now I'm joining it back to the original piece that it was on. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys? The bottom part, okay, I had used it to cut the velvet. Now I went ahead to take that back, that's the lining, and then I joined it back to the top part that I cut it out from. Okay, so once I've done that, this is what it looks like. I'm just sewing them together neatly so everything is nice and flat. Now I'm just taking my fabric pieces and placing the lining on top of it, and then I'm cutting out any excess. Remember that when I was cutting the fabric, I used the lining, but I had added ½ inch allowance all the way around. So that's what I'm taking out now, because it's important that you take that out so that your lining and your fabric have the same measurements. Now I've also gone ahead to sew my back pieces of my lining and my fabric. Now I'm going to show you guys how we join the front pieces. This is my lining. I'm joining the side front to the center front. I placed them right sides facing from the bottom. I sewed it all the way to the top. Now for the other side, I sewed it from the bottom, and then I stopped at the underbust point, took it out, and then I'll show you what I'll do next. Okay, so I got to this underbust point, took it out, and then I used my fingers to basically align both pieces together from that point all the way upwards, simply because it's a bit hard and it's a bit tricky to carry on sewing from the bottom all the way to the top without doing this. Okay, again, I have detailed tutorials on Princess Bustiers and all the intricacies and all of that. Please do check those videos out. They would really help you to understand this part. So once I've done that, this is our lining done. Now these are our fabric pieces. I'm also going to go ahead and just join both pieces, that's the side front and the center front, just like I did with the lining. But as you can see, the bottom half of this is not there because it was replaced with the velvet. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys what I do. And then I'm also going to go ahead and sew the other side as well. Again, I went and I stopped at the underbust point, took that out, and then I aligned it with my fingers and then started from the top all the way to the bottom. Now, as you've noticed, this aligning with my fingers happens on the right side. So it happens when I'm joining the right side front to the center front. But the left one works perfectly because you can sew it from the bottom all the way to the top without any issues. Now, taking my velvet fabric, as you can see, I've already gone ahead to draw my lines like I showed you. Now I'm taking my regiline boning. You can use a regular plastic boning, but you'd have to create boning cases for it before you can insert the plastic boning. I have a video where I show you how to create boning casing and how to insert your plastic boning into your boning casing. The link will be in the description box and also on the iCard. But for this video, I'm using regiline boning because it's easier, faster, and I love how it looks at the end of the day. It almost looks like there's no boning. Okay, so that's the look I'm honestly going for. Now I'm just taking the bustier, that's the Princess That Bustier for the fabric, and I'm just creating notches along that seam, or along the seam allowance rather, so that I'm able to iron it and everything is nice and flat. I'm going to use a tailor's ham to iron this very neatly. I have a tutorial on how to make a tailor's ham. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. So you can see I've gone ahead to iron the seam allowance open and everything is nice and neat. Now I'm just folding this in half, and I'm also going ahead to notch the center point. I'm also placing the center point of that underbust corset part, that's the velvet part that has the boning. I'm just placing it right on the center, and then I'm sewing from the center to one end and from the center again to the other end. Okay, now I'm just gonna have to just sew down that allowance. So the allowance I got when I joined both pieces, I'm making sure that it's facing the velvet part, and then I'm just gonna have to sew that down. Now I'm taking my yoke. Without the lining, I'm just going to go ahead and sew the yoke on that neckline. Join the yoke to the neckline. From the center to one point, and I'm also going to go ahead and do that from the center to the other point. This is what we have now, right? Now I'm just going to fold the lace yoke back down. Now I'm going to place my lining on top of it, and then I'm going to also sew from the center to one point and from the center to the other point. Open this up. This is what we have. Now we're going to make sure that the allowance we have is facing the lining side. I'm also going to go ahead and just sew that down, or top stitch that. Closing that up, I'm just going to have to sew the sides closed as well. This is what we have once we are done with that. Look at how neat that is, guys. Both the front and the back looks really good. Now I'm going to have to just close that bottom part, so sewing the lining and the fabric together so it's one piece. Now moving on to the back piece, I'm also going to insert my yoke, just placing the lining and the fabric pieces right sides facing with the yoke or the lace in between both of them. So it's kind of like a sandwich. So the lace yoke is sandwiched in between the fabric and the lining. Now I also went ahead to just make sure that the allowance was facing the lining side, and then I top stitched. Close that up, back up again, and then I sewed the sides closed. This is what it looks like for both pieces. And yeah, I went ahead to also go ahead and sew both back pieces together, and then I went ahead to join into my skirt part, and I made a dress out of this. This is what it looks like. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is the finished result. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe.